Hello, welcome to the stream. Hello, friends. Glad to have y'all. Tonight, we are going to most likely finish up the Georgics of Virgil, so I can't wait. I already have a book in mind that I have chosen. That one should be a little more interesting, honestly. This book is fun, it's just old Roman poetry. You feel like an old professor, so. But let's just get into it, shall we? Yeah, there's not much to it. Let's see here. That up. What are we feeling? Let's do rain on a car roof. There we go. Yeah. Excellent. So, Georgics of Virgil. But whether it's cattle or horses that you're rearing, nothing is more important for keeping them strong as guarding them from the secret enticements of lust. That is the reason bulls are sent away. To pasture all by themselves in lonely meadows, on the other side of intervening mountains, or across wide rivers, or else walled up alone inside enclosures with their own bins for feeding. Seeing the females inflames them, and little by little weakens and wastes away their vital powers. And she, with her sweet allurements, distracts them from remembering their woods and quiet pastures. And, many times, she excites two ardent suitors to fight it out in battle with their horns. In the forest of Scylla, a beautiful heifer is grazing, and because of her, two raging bulls contend in violent, tremendous altercation, charging with beveled horns, butting and goring, the black blood flowing down their sides, their mighty bellowing re-echoes and re-echoes, in the woods up to the top of the nearby mountain. Nor is it the custom for the combatants to dwell together after the fight. The one who is lost has to go elsewhere, exiled to unknown places, grieving over his shame, and because of the blows he suffered from the one who conquered him, and because the loss of his love is unavenged. With a sidelong look at the stall that was his own, he takes his leave of his father's territory. Where he has gone to he sleeps on bare hard stones, and has nothing to pasture on but bristly leaves and pointed reed grass. And in grief and shame, he studies how to restore and strengthen his powers. He puts himself to the test, and in order to learn to fill his vengeful horns with the fury, charges at tree trunks, strikes blows against the winds again and again, and paws at the sand, preparing. Then, when his strength is gathered, his powers renewed, he carries the banner into battle, rushing headlong upon the unweary, unready foe. As when far out in the ocean, a white froth first begins to show a deep sea surge, and then the sea surge raises itself and rises and arches, becomes a great comber rushing in toward land, and along the rocks and reefs with enormous noise, and big as a mountain, falling crashing down, the water boiling up in violent eddies, from the bottom throwing black sand high. All living creatures on earth, no matter whether it's human beings or other kinds, fish, cattle, beautiful birds, they all rush into the fire. Love is the same for all. There's no time when the lioness forgets her cubs and prowls with such avid savagery across the plains, when the shapeless bear, rampaging through the woods, is in the cause of so much havoc and destruction It's the time when the boar is at his very fiercest, the tigress is at her worst. Ah, not the right time to dare to go out in the deserted Libyan fields. Haven't you seen it? Your horse begins to tremble, his whole body shivers because he's snuffed a hint, familiar scent on the breeze. The reins won't hold him back then, nor would the whip, nor wide opposing rivers, whose rising can bring mountains down into their roiling waters. And the great Sabellian boar gets himself ready, rubbing his sides and shoulders on a tree trunk, hardening them against the wounds to come, wetting his tucks, pawing and pawing the ground. And what about the youth in the black of night, as the midnight storm bursts over his head, and the huge doors of the heavens thunder and clang, and the waves colliding against the cliffs echo the noise? His wretched parents cannot call him back, nor the thought of her whose death will be the sight of his poor body washed upon the shore. And that about the wild hogs, and the wolves, and Bacchus's spotted lynxes, and peaceable stags, in battle with one another, without a doubt, beyond all others, is the madness of mares. Venus, the goddess of love, created this madness at the time she caused the Petonian racing mares turn on their master, Glaucus, eating his limbs. Love drives the maddened mares to swim wide rivers. Love drives them to climb up mountains. Love drives them through the roaring waters of Asacanus, up the sides of Gargara. In spring, for it's in spring that they're in the heat of love, that's burning in the marrow of their bones. They make their way up to the top of some cliff and stand together there, facing the west, to snuffle the wind, and then, mirabile dictu, pregnant, but from no lover, the wind. Over rocks and valleys and cliffs they race away, not east wind toward the place where you arise, nor where the sun comes up, but to the north, where Boreas and Coreus, or to the south, where blackest Ulster begins its origin, bringing on gloomy skies and chilling rain. And there and then they stand, and from their groins low slime drips that herdsmen call horse madness, hippomanes, that wicked stepmothers gather sometimes to mix with their herbs and to make their spells. But meanwhile, unrecoverable time is flying past us while we linger, enraptured by our theme. Now it is time to turn away from the herds and undertake my other task, the care of my woolly flock and shaggy goats. The task is hard, and so, you sturdy shepherds, the fame would be hard won and well deserved. Nor am I ignorant of the magnitude of the work of conquering a theme like this with words, and winning glory, when the subject is so lowly, by sweet love urged to roam Parnassus's lonely heights. It is a delight to go where none has gone before. No predecessor's wheel track to be seen upon the slope down toward the Castilian spring. O venerated Palais, now we must take up the theme in a sonorous, lofty strain. First, I command that you spread upon the herd the hard, cold ground of the pens in which you shelter your sheep to feed on herbage over the winter, till leafy summer comes back with straw and handfuls of straw fronds to protect your feet and the feet of vulnerable flock from the ice that brings on scab and the loathsome foot gout. And next, I command that your goats be given plenty of leaves of arbutus to eat and lots of fresh water, and that you set up stalls for them facing south, facing the sun, sheltered from wind until, at the end of winter, cold Aquarius, the water carrier departs in showers, and goats deserve no less than sheep deserve. What they provide no less than sheep provide. A Meletian fleece dyed with Tyrian purple will, to be sure, be sold for more, and yet the nanny goats produce more offspring and more milk. The more the milk from the udders richly foams in the milky pail, the more it richly flows from the pressed teats at the next milking. The billy goats' grey beards and bristly coats are clipped to make enough rough cloth for army camps and jackets for shivering sailors against the cold. When spring comes round again, the goats are able to forage in woods on the Lycian heights, feeding on brambles and mountain-loving briar, and they know the way to come home all by themselves, with their kids following after. The she-goat's udders so full that they can scarcely clear the threshold. The more they get along without your help, the more they need the help that you can give them, sheltering them from the wind and from the cold, bringing them twigs to eat for sustenance, and leaving your hay bins open all winter long. But let us eagerly go now, seeking the cool fields where joyful summer called to do so by zephyrs in the early morning sends the sheep and goats out to the glades and pastures. And the first star, Lucifer, appears, and the day is new, and the fields are hoary, because the dew that clinging to the tender grass is most pleasing to the flocks then. Later, in the morning, when everywhere is querulous, the querulous cicadas complain in every bush, and the flocks are thirsty, I'll take them down to drink from brooks and pools, or the wells where water runs through oaken channels to quench their thirst, and after that, at noon, when the day is at its hottest, seek out with them somewhere shady, some shady place where Jove's great oak spreads out its giant arms from the ancient trunk, or a grove that lies in a holy darkness, caused by the congregated shade of ilex trees, then lead them into the afternoon back down to drink from those pure, murmuring, trickling waters, and pasture them again till sunset comes. When Vesper, the evening star, arises, brings its coolness to the air, and the dew that falls from the risen moon refreshes the waiting glades, and the halcyon bird is heard along the shores, and finches in the trees and all the thickets. How shall I tell of the Libyan shepherds and their scattered settlements of huts out in the vast sparse reaches of the desert, and their flocks that wander, browsing, night and day, for months at a time, unsheltered and unfenced? The herdsman brings his house and all that's in it, every last thing he owns along with him, and his Cretan bow and arrow, his Spartan dog, just as the fierce campaigning Roman soldier, wearing his heavy armor, halts his platoon, lays down his heavy pack to pitch his tent, in expectation of the next day's battle, when he will attack the enemy by surprise. It's very different where the Scythians are, where the violent Danube roils its yellow sands, and a Rhodopean mountain range leans back and reaches up high into the central pole. The Scythians keep their herds pent up in stalls. The trees are leafless, terrain utterly grassless, and everywhere the earth lies under shapeless piles of snow, and ice 7 cubits high. It's always winter. The cold wind always blows. The sun never dispels the icy mists. Not when, not when at noon he's carried by his horses up to the highest sky, nor when his chariot plunges back down into the crimson sea. Ice without warning gathers and thickens up over the moving waters of the river, and soon the stream, once welcoming to to boats, will bear big wagons with their iron wheels on its frozen surface. Everywhere, brass pipes split and burst open. The very clothes on people's backs are frozen stiff as boards. They have to use hatchets to get at wine to drink. Whole lakes turn into solid bricks. Icicles form and hang on the unkempt beards of men. Meanwhile, the storm goes on, and fills the sky with snow. And many cattle perish. The oxen stand bewildered, their giant bodies covered with shrouds of frost and crowded together. The deer are paralyzed with fright. Their horns are barely to be seen above the drifts. Men hunt them, not by setting loose their dogs, putting out nets or ropes of bright red feathers with which to entrap them, but as the creatures vainly struggle to breast the mountainous white snow, the men come in with their knives and, at close quarters, butcher them as they fall, bellowing down and bearing the bodies away with cries of joy. And the people themselves live comfortably and easy, safe and sound, together in the caves they've dug out under the earth, rolling great logs to the blazing hearth and throwing them on the fire, and willing the night away with joyful games and celebrating, instead, with wine and with beer, or the strong drink that's made of fermented berries. These are the far north hyperboreal people living under the 7 stars of the wagon and buffeted by the wind that blows down from the high Riphagan crags, a race of wild men wearing clothes they'd made from the skins of beasts. If raising sheep for wool is your concern, be sure to avoid pasturing where the grass grows high, and you must keep your pasture clear of caltrops, burrs, and other bristling growth. From the beginning, be sure to choose your flock only those sheep whose fleece is soft and white, but no matter how white the ram, if there are veins of black on the underside of his moist tongue, reject that ram and look for another one, so that the newborn lambs won't be dark-spotted. O moon, it was with a lure of pure white wool that you, if what we're told, as true, were captivated by Pan, Arcadia's god, calling to the most innermost forest glade, and so, it is said, you did not spurn his call. But he whose care is milk must be sure to carry lotus and medic and other salty greens to the goats in the stalls, so that all the more they'll love to drink from the stems, and therefore all the more distend their udders, and so their milk will retain a faint savor of salt. It's the practice of many goat keepers to keep the kids away from their mothers as soon as they possibly can after they're born. They muzzle the mouths of the kids with iron muzzles. Milk that's yielded at dawn or in the daylight is pressed into cheese at night. The yield of milking at sunset or in the nighttime is pressed at dawn. A shepherd with a basket carries the cheese to town to sell at the market, or maybe they salt it to keep it for themselves, or when winter comes. Nor should you forget the proper care of dogs, your Spartan dogs so good at running, and your Mollusians so fierce. Feed them alike on a rich diet of whey. You'll never have to live with the dread of wolves getting into your flock, or the nocturnal thief getting into your stables, or the vagabond Spanish brigand invading your place. How many times along with your dogs you'll pursue the timid wild ass? How many times you'll hunt the hare with them and the doe? How many times you'll rouse the wild boar out of his hidden lair with your barking dogs, and with their noisy clamor you'll chase the panicking roebuck over the hills until you run him at last into the nets. It's important that you fumigate your stables with the smoke of odorous cedar, and Syrian gums to keep the filthy water snakes away. The viper, which is fatal to the touch, fearful of daylight, hides out sometimes under stalls that have been neglected, sometimes an adder, which is a plague of cattle, shedder of venom, from his hiding place up in the sheltering thatch, has glided down and hugged the earth below. Shepherd, pick up a stick, pick up a stone, and strike him down as he raises his menacing head and swells his hissing neck. Look how in flight his terrified head first disappears into the ground, and then his writhing middle coils and uncoils, and the rest of him, writhing, straightens and follows after. The final fold, enfolding the last to vanish, and there's that dreadful snake whose habitat is the marshy glades of Calabria, down there, big spotted along his endless underlength, his threatening breast held high, his scaly back breathing and coiling. As long as there's water gushing out from those sources of streams, as long as the spring and the south winds bringing their springtime rainfall steep the earth and water, this serpent inhabits the sides of pools where he can satisfy his black throat's appetite with fish and croaking frogs. When the swamps all dried out and the soil is gaping wide with rolling flames eyes, he moves into the fields and rages frenzied, gone mad with hunger and thirst, and because of the heat, keep me from giving in to the soft temptation of sleeping at midday under the open sky, or taking my ease on a slope nearby a grove, when he comes gliding towards me through the grass, youthful and shining, his old skin sloughed away, abandoning his children in their nest, his crest erect, darting his three-forked tongue. I will teach you, too, about the sicknesses that animals are afflicted with, disgusting scabies, attacks that sheep when cold and rain persist, attacks the sheep with cold and rain persist, and penetrate to the quick, and all the world is hoary with frost, or when the sweat hasn't been washed away after the shearing, and the sheep have wandered into the brambles and gotten open cuts on their vulnerable flesh. That is the reason the shepherds lead their flock into a river to bathe, letting the ram float off in his soaking fleece downstream with the current. Or maybe they smear the shorn bodies with bitter oil of olive leaves and black bitumen, will and hellebore, and silver scum and sulfur in a thick blend with pitch of Ida and wax. But nothing is more timely than if you're able to bring yourself to use a knife to open the ulcer to exposure. The ulcer grows and nourishes itself by hiding within, while the shepherd, who isn't willing to put his hands healingly on the sores, sits passively by and prays to the gods to send more fortunate signs. And furthermore, and still more urgent, if the pain has glided his way into the very marrow of the bleeding sick one's bones and rages there, and the fever is in the joints, you should try to turn the fiery heat aside by cutting open a vein in the creature's foot, letting the blood gush out. This is the practice among the Thracian herdsmen and the fierce Galonians when they migrate up to the heights of the Rhodopean range or out in the wild desert of Getae. They who slake their thirst with the milk that's curdled with the blood of horses. If you should happen to notice that one of your herd often withdraws itself to seek the shade or lagging behind the rest, listlessly crops only to tops listlessly crops only the tops of the grasses, or sinks down sometimes out in the midfield while grazing, or long before nightfall, as if it were nightfall, wanders away towards home. Take action with your knife without delay, before the dire contagion snakes its way all through the oblivious herd. A cyclone driving violent winds before it from the sea. A cyclone driving violent winds before it in from the sea is not so swift as the onslaught of the plague, suddenly swarming down on the animals, not just one sick, but all of them all at once. The flock and the hope of the flock, every last one. Long after the time when it happened, you can see the effects of it up on the alpine slopes, or around the forts that guarded the Norcian hills, or where Timaveus flows, pastures deserted, the shepherd's glades all empty far and wide. There, in that land, one year from a morbid sky, there came a wretched autumn, glowing with heat, and every animal died, whether tame or wild. The lakes were all infested with the pastures poisoned, nor was the manner of the dying a simple matter. After the thirsty slake-seeking fever had gone all through the veins and withered the pitiful limbs, then the fluid welled up in the suffering body, and piece by piece absorbed the melting bones. It happens sometimes that the designated sacrificial victim standing beside the altar at the moment when the priest was wreathing its brow with his snow-white woolen fillet fell down and died before it could even be slain. Or, if the priest had already used his knife and placed the victim's entrails on the altar, they didn't burn at all. The oracle, when called upon, had no response to give. There was hardly any blood on the ritual knife. On the surface of the sand under the altar, there was only the slightest stain of the watery gore. Then, everywhere, in the joyous bourgeoning fields, the young cows die, or, in their pens, in the very presence of their mangers, full of food, give up the sweet life. Fawning dogs go mad. The sick swine seize with retching coughs, choke on their own swollen throats. The horse that was once victorious now miserably sinks as he tries to arise, forgetting what he had been, forgetting his pasture with its lush green grass, averting his face from the waters of the trough, over and over again, pounding the earth with a disconsolate hoof, his ears laid back. Fitfully sweating, the sweat turns cold as death grows near. His skin is dry and hard, insensible to the touch of a stroking hand. There are these signs you witness in the first days of the coming on of death. But as the suffering moves into its final phase, his eyes glare bright with the brightness of the fever. The horse's groaning, breathing, drags itself forth from deep inside. and the whole length of the body labors and strains, with drawn-out shuddering, sobbing black blood pours out from the nose, and the creature's throat is utterly blocked up and choked by its tongue. There are those who've thought only of possible hope when there is a funnel to pour in a little water, but this itself facilitated death. Revived, they raged with weird, new, desperate strength, and in the final crisis, God grants such madness not to ourselves but to our enemies. They tore at our own flesh with their own bare teeth. And, pulling the heavy plowshare along the furrows, sweating under the weight, an ox falls dying, its body heaving and groaning, the blood and foam issuing from its mouth. Oh! Issuing from its mouth. The mournful plowman unyokes the other yokes. Its soaring brother, leaving the task half finished. The plowshare stilled. The heart of the dying ox cannot be moved by the grove's deep shadows, or the pasture's softness, or by the purer than amber streams that make their way over to the stones downhill to the valley. His skin hangs loose upon his sides. Inertia weighs heavily in this stupor of his eyes. His heavy neck sinks heavily to the earth. What was the use of all the work he did? What good was it that he turned the heavy earth with the plowshare he was yoked to? No wine of Bacchus brought harm to him, or to the others like him. For them, there were no lavish banquets. For them, their feast was pasture grass. Their drinking cups were flowing streams, or the clear water of the springs. No care disturbed their peaceful sleep at night. At the time, there, they say men looked for cattle to sacrifice in the rituals of Juno, and there were anywhere to be found. Ill-matched wild oxen had been used to pull the chariots up from the goddess's mountain temple, and men had to scratch at the earth by themselves with harrows, and use their own fingernails to dig the holes to plant their seeds in, and their own strained necks to drag their creaking wagons up the hills. No treacherous wolf then reconnoitered the sheepfold, nor prowled nocturnally around the flock. His own acute distress had made him tame and timid as the shy, elusive stags. Wandered in public, where there are dogs and houses, and there were many creatures many creatures of the deep, whose corpses lay on the beaches like the bodies of shipwrecked soldiers washed up on the waves. And sea calves fled from the sea, freshwater rivers, and the viper perished, having vainly wound into its winding hiding place to hide. And the hydra too, its astonished scales erect, nor was the air hospitable to birds. Falling, they left their lives up under the clouds, nor were there remedies that made things better. The knowledge of those who study remedies like Chiron, the son of Philyra, or Melephus, the son of Amathalon, only did harm. Let up into the light from your Stygian shadows, pale Tisiphone rages, driving on terror and plague before her, and every day raising up higher and higher her greedy head. The lowing of the cattle and bleating of sheep is endlessly echoed back from waterless rivers, dry banks and supine hills, and now she brings death to the many and heaps up in the stables disgusting, rotting, delesquient bodies, until men have learned to dig out pits and cover the bodies over and out of sight, for the hides could never be put to use, nor could they ever disinfect the meat by boiling. They could never even shear the wool and use it. It was so filthy and so full of sickness, the cloth would hang untouchable on the loom. If any men should make a garment of it, vile sweat and fever blisters would move across his stinking body, and pretty soon the anthrax, ignis sacer, would have its way with him. And we are at the fourth Georgic. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Alright. Walk the fuck in. Now, in its turn, I will pursue the subject of honey, heaven sent, a gift from the sky. May Cineas look with favor on this story, which tells about a marvelous tiny scene, and I'll in order speak of magnanimous captains and of an entire nation, its character, activities, its tribes, and of their battles. The task is small, but not the glory. If the powers that might oppose it, it will allow it. And if Apollo listens to my prayer, first of all, find a protected place for the bees to make their home, a place that's safe from the wind, that might prevent them from getting back with their food, and safe from the sheep or the wanton kids that trample the flowers down, or the wandering heifer shaking the dew from the grass and bruising the rising blades. Protect the rich stalls of their humming combs from their scaly, shiny-backed lizard, and from the bee-eater, and other birds of that sort, and Prosne, whose bloody hands have left their signs upon her crimson breast. Any of these can devastate the bees, catching them in their mouths and carry them home as delicacies to feed their cruel children. And there should be a limpid spring nearby, or a moss-edged pool, or else a little brook, almost unseen, making its way through the grass, a big palm tree or oleaster shading the vestibule, or the place where the bees have settled. So when the kings of the hive lead and swarm forth in the welcoming season, and glad to be free at last, the youthful bees are capering and playing. There will be a stream bank or pond bank there, where they can escape the unaccustomed heat, and where the leaves of a tree can shelter them, and whether it's pools or running streams, there must be willow shoots and stones disposed across, as resting places for them to spread their wings and dry them in the sun. If any had happened to linger and were caught in a sudden shower, or the wind had suddenly blown them into the water, and there should be sweet blooming marjoram near, and the odor of sapphirilla spreading far, and aromatic thyme, and violet beds drinking from the trickling spring or stream. Whether the hive is made by sewing together concave strips of bark or woven of pliant osier wands, be sure the entrance is narrow. For winter cold makes the honey freeze and congeal, heat causes it to melt and liquefy, and either of these is cause for fear for the bees. It's for this reason they vie for one another to smear wax over the chinks in the walls of their houses, or to stop them up with the resinous stuff of flowers, or more sticky than the birdlime or pitch of Virgin Ida. They bring it home and save it for this purpose, and, so we're told, sometimes they establish their houses in a hiding place underground to keep themselves safe, or they're discovered have settled themselves in the cells with the porous rock, or maybe the cavity of a tree's decaying trunk. So help them out by spreading mud or clay over the walls of their beehive, and maybe scatter a few leaves over it too. Be sure there isn't a yew tree growing too near where the hive is placed. Beware of rusting crab too close to it. To the smoke is poisonous to the bees. Beware of any place where the smell of mud prevails, or where a voice from within a hollow rock, comes echoing back in response to the sound that struck it. When the golden sun has driven winter back under the earth and opened up the sky with the radiance of summer, then the bees fly everywhere through all the groves and glades, gathering from the beautiful flowers and lightly imbibing from the surface of the streams. And it's thus that, motivated by some joy I know not how to name, they go about the caring for their offspring and their nests. It's thus that artfully they make new wax, and shape, and form, and mold their clinging honey. And so, when you look up and see the swarm emancipated from the hive and floating up the starry sky through the summer air, or when you wander at the sight of a dark cloud carried along the drifting on the wind, take heed, for there they are, on the hunt for leafy shelter near sweet water. There you should scatter scents as I prescribe, melsophilium, and the common healing herb that's known as bee bread. And let there be the sound of tinkling bells and the cymbals of Sebel, the mighty mother. The bees will settle of themselves upon the scented, settling places you've prepared. It's like a tongue twister, goddamn. And of themselves will hide themselves within the inner recesses of their cradling home. But if they come out and to do battle for warfare, often with great disturbance breaks out between two kings, you can sense their rage and excitement getting ready. As the hoarse, pulsing warfare music sounds like raucous trumpets summoning to the fight, then agitated they will crowd all together, with quivering wings, getting their weapons ready, bustling, using their beaks to sharpen their stings, then swarm around the king and the royal tent, and then, with a great din, challenge the enemy. It's thus that in the spring, when the day is near and clear, and the field is bright, they burst forth from their gates, and the battle's joined. The noise of it is heard in the upper air, and hostile enemies, embroiled in a great pulsating globe of clashing bees, that then precipitately falls down to the ground, thicker than hail that rains down from the sky, or acorns falling from a shaken oak. In the thick of it, arrayed with splendid wings, the kings themselves, great heart and tiny bodies, fight on and lead the fight, refusing to yield, persisting till the final moment when one or the other, victorious, will drive the vanquished to turn their backs and flee. And little dust thrown down upon the scene will quiet this contention and this fury. But once you've gotten both kings back from battle, ascertain which is the inferior body and kill him, so it won't be a waste of your time, and let the better one reign alone in his place. There are two kinds of kings. One of them, blazoned with orange and ruddy golden glittering scales, the other one's disheveled, lazy-looking, ignobly trailing a fat belly behind him. And if the kings are different from each other, so is it with the commoners' bodies too. Some of them are offensive to the sight, and when, covered by dust, a wayfarer comes up from the wasteland desert, spitting out dirt from his dry, parched mouth, the other's bodies shine with light flashing from the flecks and spouts of gold. They are the better kind. From them, you'll have honey that's sweet, yet not only sweet but clear, just right for subduing wine that tastes so strong. But when the bees are heedless of their combs, and letting their hives grow cold, and flying about just playing around in the sunshine, you have to learn to prohibit their feckless hearts from such aimless frolic. It's easy to do so. Tear off the wings of the monarch bee. When he's unable to fly, the rest won't dare leave their camp. And you should make it attractive for them to stay by planting gardens of sweet-smelling saffron flowers, and let the guardian god Priapus be stationed there with his willow instrument, to guard them against both thieves and birds, and let the man whose charge is it to care for them bring garden pines and thyme down from the hills, and set them out around their dwelling places, and encourage their plantings with friendly irrigation. And to be sure, if it were not true that I have nearly come to an end with this labor of mine, that I have nearly come to an end with this end of this my labor, and now am almost ready to turn my vessel eagerly toward home and furl my sails, it might be that I'd sing to celebrate the care it takes to cultivate the flowers that makes our beautiful gardens. I'd sing of Pastimum and its roses, and how they bloom twice a year, and how the endive drinks with gladness from the brooks, and how the green wild celery plants adorn the riverbanks, and the cucumber tendrils winds and turns and coils its way through the grass, and swells and becomes its fruit. Nor would I refrain from singing of Narcissus, which blooms so late in the year, pale ivy, or the trailing stems of acanthus, or the myrtle that loves to grow on the banks beside the sea. For I remember down by Tarentum, where the dark Galiceus waters were yellowing grain, I saw an old Corinthian man who lived there under the arches and towers of the fort, on the little patch of land that nobody wanted, too poor for oxen to plow, unfit for pasture, not right for planting vines. But this old man carefully planted white lilies, vervain, and poppies, and different sorts of vegetables for his table, and thus he made for himself a happiness that was equal to the happiness of kings. And when he came home that night, his feast was free. He was the first in the spring to gather roses, and the first to gather apples in the fall. And even while gloomy winter still persisted, splitting the rocks with freezing cold, and holding rivers back from their courses with choking ice, the old man was already out there, getting ready, cutting back last year's soft-haired hyacinth growth, and scolding summer and its summer breezes for being so late and returning again. And so, it was that he was always the first to have a multitude of bees, and therefore the first to press the foaming honey from the comb. The pine trees and the limes that he planted flourished, and the other fruit trees too, lavish in bosom and blossom, and ripening into autumn, lavish in yield. He planted rows of elms already matured, and hardy pear trees already bearing fruit. Blackthorns hung with their ungrafted plums, and planes, though young, yet old enough to provide shade for drinking wine, beneath their bows. But I, compelled by the limits of my song, must leave his story for later chroniclers. Now, therefore, it is time to give an account of the nature of the bees and the way they live, ordained for them by Jupiter himself, rewarding them for the day they heard the music and the clanging of the cymbals of the curates, following to the cave of Dicta, where they fed the king of heaven hidden there. They are the only ones who share their children in common parentage, the only ones to share in common the houses where they dwell. They live together under the rule of law. It is only they. Oh, I'm gonna have to fucking stand 1 second. Oh my god. Alright, that sounds good. Here we go. They are the only ones who share their children in common parentage, the only ones to share in common the houses where they dwell. They live together under the rule of law. It is only they who have a common country and share an unchanging home in the summer, knowing that winter is coming. Their enterprise is to gather together what they have in common. For some, the charge and obligation is to labor in the fields. For others, the task is to begin to build the honeycomb, spreading the resinous tears of the narcissus and gluey stuff brought in from the bark of trees, and building partition walls and clinging wax. Others are charged with bringing up the young, the nation's hope, to enter into adulthood. Others pack purest honeys into the cells that swell and enlarge, infused with liquid nectar. The task of others is to guard the doors and watch the skies for signs of clouds and rain, and accept into the hive the bees returning, carrying what they're bringing in from the fields, and as an armed patrol to drive away the lazy crowd of drones from the busy stalls. The community is growing as it works. The honey is fragrant, the scent of thyme. They're like the Cyclops, as they busily forge their weapons from the heavy ore of the mine. Some of them working the pumping oxhide bellows, the others plunging the iron rods they'd make into the hissing lake. The acna growing under the anvils as they pound them, and all the giants together, one after the other, in rhythmic order, raising their arms with mighty power to strike again in rhythmic order, and all other turning the iron with the tongs. If little things can be compared to great innate desire to work for the commonwealth inspires the bees, and each of them has his role to care for the older bees as older bees is for the town. The construction of hives, the artful making of houses where they dwell, the younger bees late in the night come wearily flying home, their legs weighed down with time they've pastured on. Arbutus, gray willow, marjoram, ruby crocus, rich linden blossoms, and dusky hyacinth. And once time for all to rest, one time to labor. Thus, early in the morning, out they rush, pouring forth from their gates. Not one holds back. And then, when early evening comes around and vesper tells them it's time for them to leave their foraging in the fields, back home they come. Back home they come. I just lost my place. Holy shit. I'm blind. I'm blind! Blind. There we go. Back home they come. and you can hear their murmuring humming as they groom themselves and hither and thither flit around the doors and thresholds of their houses, and after that they compose themselves to rest within their chambers. The sound doesn't and sound sleep possesses their bodies, weary from their labors. All through the night, the bees are utterly silent. On days when rain is coming, they don't go far away from their hives, nor do they fly up when the east wind gales are blowing. They stay near the safe walls of their town, looking for water and flying low. And sometimes, in their flights, as wallowing vessels often carry ballast to steady themselves in choppy waters, the bees will carry little pebbles to balance themselves and keep them steady in unstable air. It happens often as it is heavy laden. Oh, it happens often that as heavy laden, they wander among hard rocks, their wings are bruised, and so they lose their lives. Such is their love for flowers and the glory of making honey. And you will be surprised that the bees are never known to indulge in sexual intercourse. They never dissipate or enervate their bodies by making love. They do not bring forth children by labor of birth. Instead, they gather them by plucking the little babies with their mouths from the leaves of trees and from the sweetest herbs. This is the way they produce a succeeding monarch and all the new little citizens of the realm. And they renew themselves, refashion, and renew their places in waxen halls, and so, though only a narrow period of time defines how long the life of each will last, it's never longer than past the seventh summer. The race persists in immortality. The fortunes maintained for generations, grandsire down from grandsire, down from grandsire. Neither Egypt nor great Lydia, nor her tribes of Parthia, nor the Haspedian Medes pay homage such as these to their royal master. As long as he is safe, they are united. He being lost, the bond of their allegiance is broken, and they pull to pieces the honey that they themselves constructed, and tear apart the articulated honeycombs they made. The chieftain is the guardian of their labor. They worship him, and follow him, and make a great clamoring noise as they crowd around him. Often, they lift him up upon their shoulders, and carry him about to show their fealty. They put their bodies in danger for him in wars and seek a noble death amid the carnage. Because of the such signs and instances, some say bees have drunk from their light of heaven and have a share in the divine intelligence. For the God they say is there in everything, in earth, and the range of sea, and the depth of sky, the flocks, the herds, and men, all creatures there are, at birth derive their little lives from him, and when they die, their life returns to him. And having been unmade is made again. There is, they say, no place at all for death. The life of beings flies up to the stars and finds its place there in heaven above. Whenever you think it's time to open up their narrow houses to get at the honey treasure they've hoarded there, first you must freshen your mouth with a little water and hold out a smoking stick in front of you. As your hands reach in, do this to sedate the bees and keep them calm. The raging of bees when they're disturbed is more than violent. Their bites fused with poison, and they leave their stingers fixed in the veins they attack, and they give up their lives to do it. 2-3 times a year, the rich produce is gathered, 2 harvests a year. The first of them takes place when the Pleiad Tagete, with a disdainful foot, is taking her leave of the waters of the sea to show her beautiful face to the waiting earth. The other is when the very same star, in flight from reigning Pisces, sadly descends from the sky to disappear beneath the wintry waves. But if you have reason to fear there's going to be a hard winter ahead, then you want to protect the bees against the future, guarding against the sheltering of their hopes and of their spirits. Why would you hesitate to help them out by fumigating the hive with the smoke of time and clearing out the empty waxing cells? Sometimes a newt has secretly gotten at the honeycomb and nibbled it. Sometimes the bees that hide from the light, have gotten into the congested chambers of the hive, or else the drone, freeloader, feasts from another table. Fierce wasps come in with overwhelming forces, the moth, the creature of a dreaded race, or the spider that Minerva hates, that hangs loose curtains in the doorways of their houses. The greater the devastation, the more the bees urgently work towards to restore the ruins of their fallen nations, refilling their rows with honeycomb cells, refurbishing their stock rooms with gum brought back from the flowers. It's true. For bees, as it is for humans, life brings sickness with it. You can see the signs of it in bees. Without any doubt, their color changes as soon as they fall ill. Their bodies are all disheveled, and there's a dreadful emaciation in the look of them. And then you can see the other bees as they carry out from the dwelling places the bodies of those whom the life has gone, and you can see the sick ones not dead yet, that hang almost motionless around the doors outside, with crossed and tangled feet, or still inside, listless with hunger and shrunken from the cold. And then you can hear a mournful, long drawn out whispering, rustling sound, like the sound of the cold south wind as it murmurs in the woods, or like the agitated hissing of the sea. As the waves draw back, or their seething noise of a fire eating its way as it burns inside a furnace. At such a time, you must offer them the odor of the smoke of sweet-smelling resin, and feed them honey through oaten straws, to encourage the weary creatures and invite them to partake of accustomed food. A good idea, as well, to offer dried rose leaves in a mixture with powdered oak gall, or must that has been enriched by boiling down, or sun-dried clusters of Scythian grapes, together with an aromatic centurium and thyme. And there's a meadow plant called Amelias, easy to see because from a single root, one stem produces an enormous fountain of golden cascading leaves, and among them shining dark purple violet lights, and the flower petals, these often garland the altars of the gods. It is a bitter taste. It is gathered by the shepherds where they find themselves in the pastures or the banks of a wandering Millis stream. You should boil the roots in fragrant wine and leave the food set out in baskets near the doors. But if it suddenly happens that the whole stock is utterly lost and you don't know how to go about establishing another, it's time to disclose the legendary secrets of the Arcadian master, which bees were engendered from the putrid blood of slaughtered bullock. I will go back to the very origin of the legend, tell about it from where the fortunate Canopians live, by the quivered Parthians' borders, in the delta of the 7 mouths of the river Nile that flow downhill from the swarthy Indian country, and makes Egypt so fecund with alluvial soil, and where they sail their painted skiffs on fields where the river waters flooded and grew still, Their safety depends on their knowledge of this art. First, choose for this very purpose a constricted place, in which to constrict it further, then constrict a narrow shed roofed with a roof of tile, and close it in with the stall and with walls closed in together. And in the forestall, oh my god, and in the four walls toward the four winds, set four windows letting in a light aslant, and then select a bullet 2 summers old, his first new horns emerging on his brow, and then get the bullock into the shed. And then, although he struggles against it, stuff up his nostrils and stop him from bringing it, and stop up the breath in his mouth. And after that, beat him to death, until his innards collapse inside his hide, as his body lies there, put broken branches around him in the shed, and mirage him in time, and leave him there. This should be done when the zephyrs, with their touch, have just begun to quicken and stir the waves, and just before the meadows begin to blush with their new color, and just before the chattering swallow hangs her nest from the high house rafters. Meanwhile, fluid grows warm, and in his softening bones, and it ferments, and wonderful new creatures come into view, footless at first, but soon, with humming wings, they swarm. They swarm, and more try out their wings on an empty air, and then burst forth like a summer shower from summer clouds, or like a shower of arrows from the bows of Parthian warriors entering the fray. What god is it, O muses, who devised an art like this? Where was it that such a strange new knowledge came from and was learned by men? As the story is told, the shepherd Aristeus, as by Peneus, he prepared to leave the Vale of Tempe after it had happened that because of sickness or starvation, all of his stock of bees was lost. Lamenting, stood by the sacred source from which the river arose, and cried out to his mother for this complaint. "O mother, serene mother, you who live here in this whirlpool, why did you give birth to me in this glorious lineage of gods? If it is true that, as you say, my father was Thambirian Apollo, that I should be so hated by the fates, or what has caused you so to reject the love you had for me? Why did you foster me in the hope of heaven? Now even the honor that by hard-wrought skill I have achieved through all my immortal effort, bring the crops in safely against all odds, and to bring for all the creatures of the farm. Mother, I here renounce, if you are seized by hatred, for the work that I have done, cut my fruitful woods, burn down my barns, destroy my crops, and the seed that make new crops, and take an axe and slash my vines to the ground." His mother had heard the cry in her chamber, deep in the waters of the river. The nymphs around her were spinning wool of the Miltias that was dyed in many translucent hues and tints, their shining long hair flowing about their snow-white necks. Trimo and Xantho, Ligeia, Philadelphia, Sidipe, and golden-haired Lysorius, the one and virgin maiden, the other having just begun to experience the first signs of the labors that Lucina fosters, and the daughters of Ocean, Cleo, and Barrow, both of them clad in drappled deerskin garments, and both arrayed in ornaments of gold. Ephyre, Ophis, an Asian Diopeia, swift Arethusa, her arrows put aside, and in the midst was Clemen, telling stories of lovelorn Vulcan, and of Mars's stratagems and furtive stolen pleasures, and telling all the numerous loves of the gods since chaos, the beginning of the world. And as the company of nymphs attended to the stories she was telling, captivated the soft wool purling from their turning spindles, suddenly Aristaeus' loud lament was heard by his mother's ears, and a second time, and all the nymphs on their crystal thrones were startled. But Arethusa went up to the water's surface and raised her golden head above the waves, and looked and called back down from far above and said, "Serene sister, not without reason have you been struck with fear because you've heard this loud lamenting cry. It is your son, your dear Aristaeus, weeping stands on the river bank of the waters of our father, accusing you, by name, of cruelty." The mother, struck with dread, replied to her, "Oh, bring him here. Bring him to me. He is permitted to cross the threshold of the gods." And saying this, she caused the mighty streams to draw apart, so that the youth could enter. The streams, like mountains, stood arched high around him, admitting him down into the vast recesses and welcoming him therein. And so he entered, amazed at his mother's house, the realms of waters, amazed at the lakes locked and the caverns down there, and the groves of echoing rock, and stupefied by the mighty noise of all the rivers there are, each of them flowing its way in its own direction, the Phasis and the Lycus, and the source from which Enipeus rises and breaks forth, and Father Tiber and Hypanis roaring down along its bouldered course, and Mycenaean, Caicus, and the Po, the bellowing bull whose charging forehead has two golden horns. No river has more violent force than this. As though the cultivated fields, its flows and pours itself into the purple sea. And when he'd come into his mother's bower, beneath its pendant sheltering of stone, and she had heard his sad lament, the sisters, each of them with their task, prepared the feast, pouring out pure spring water to wash his hands, and offering smooth-shorn napkins. Others set out delicacies for the feast, and drinking cups, and filled them full to brim. The Panchaean incense perfumed fire blazed up upon the altars. And then his mother said to Aristaeus, "Take up the drinking cups of Maeonian Rhine, and let us pour the libation of Oceanus." And she recited a prayer to the Father Ocean, and to the sister nymphs, the guardians of 100 groves, and of 100 streams. 3 times the flame grew. The flame grew bright and rose to the roof. When this encouraging omen had occurred, these were the further words she had spoken to her son. In Neptune's swirling Carpathian waters, there's a seer who measures the ocean in a car, drawn by creatures half fish, half two-footed horses. There is the season when he returns to the ports of Thessaly and Pallene, his native home. The nymphs and old Nereus pay him homage, because he, Proteus, knows all things there are, what is, what once was, what will happen soon. This is ordained by Neptune, from whom he shepherds his herds of monsters and rank-smelling seals that pasture beneath the ocean waters. Seize him, my son, and bind him fast and in chains, so that he will tell you the causes of the disease and bring about a fortunate outcome. Beware, he'll grant no benefit for his wisdom. Answer no prayers unless you force him to. So bind him tight, the only way to render his trickery useless. And I myself, in the heat of noon... Wait. No, I'm right. And I myself, in the heat of noon, and when the pasture grass is thirsty and the herds are grateful, to find the shady places to rest, will lead you to the old man's secret bower, to which he retires when weary of the waves, so you can seize him when he falls asleep. But while you hold him with your hands and chains, there will be images and forms and wild beast shapes that will bewilder you, for suddenly there will be a bristling wild boar there. There will be a fearsome tiger, a huge scaly serpent, a tawny-throated lioness, or else he'll utter forth as a noise like roaring fire, and thus slip away from his bonds, or turn into water and flow away. But keep the fetters tight until he's gone through all the changes he has, and comes back to being just what he was when you found him, lying in his bower fast asleep. She spoke, and the odor of purest ambrosia was everywhere. The fragrance of it breathed in the hair of his head, and his whole being received it, transforming him into a bodily great power and grace. There is an enormous grotto that the waves of wind has driven in, have hollowed out in the high sea cliffs that stand there along the shore. Sailors' safe haven sometimes when a storm has suddenly surprised them out at sea. Within the cavern is where Proteus finds shelter, behind a huge protecting rock. Serene guided her son to where he was stationed out of the light, and ready for the ambush. And she herself stood, shrouded in mist. Apart, the torrid, parching dog star blazed in the sky. The fire of the sun had eaten up half its journey. The meadow grasses were shriveled in the heat, and the thirsting throats of the dry stream beds were baked by the scorching rays right down to the hardened mud. Proteus, seeking his usual cavern to rest in, came in from the sea. Around him, as he came, a company of creatures of the deep leaped and cavorted and played among the waves, splashing the briny ocean spray around them. Gathered in groups along the shore, the seals were getting ready for sleep, and like a shepherd guarding his hillside flock, when evening comes and Vesper brings the young steers home from the pastures, and the bleating of the lambs excites the attention of listening wolves, Proteus seats himself on a rock among his charges to count their number. Then Aristeus, as soon as he saw his chance, not giving him a moment, made a loud noise and jumped out upon him and tied the old man up. And Proteus, remembering his arts, changed himself into all kinds of wonderful things, fire, or a frightful beast, or flowing water, when no trick of his would set him free. Conquered, his conquered, he changed back into himself again, and spoke with the voice of a man. Arrogant youth, who is it who has sent you to this my place? What is it you are seeking? What is it that you want? You, Proteus. No, you. No, you know because you know all things that are. There's nothing that can deceive you. Therefore, it's time for you to give up your tricks. The guidance of gods has brought us here, to seek an oracle whose wisdom might give us the means to remedy our distress. Then, overborne by force, at last, the seer, grinding his teeth and rolling his sea-green eyes to glare at Aristasis, opened his mouth and uttered the words that told the fateful story. It is a god, no less, who persecutes you. The offense for which you are punished, though punished less than that you did deserves. Then what you did deserves is very great. It's Orpheus, unless fate intervenes, who rouses up these punishments against you, and inconsolable rages over the loss of his dear wife Eurydice. She's fled from you, headlong the river, unhappy maiden, and did not see the frightful snake that lurked in the high grass, guarding the riverbank. The cries of the sister band of dryads filled the air as high as the mountain tops. The cliffs of Rhodope wept, the cliffs of Pangaea wept, and the warrior land of Gate, or Athenia, Hebrus, along upon the unfrequented shore. Orpheus, playing his lyre, sang to himself his songs of you, dear wife, as day came on with the light of the morning sun, and as the light descended in the evening, singing, he went down through the very throat of Tarnaeus, the high gate of the dark kingdom of Dis, and through the murky grove where Tremor dwells in black obscurity, and entered into the maid's place, the place of the dreadful king, in the hearts no human prayers can use and cause pity. And set into motion by the sound of music, from the lowest depths of Erebus, there came a numerous as the many hundred birds that, driven there by the coming on of the evening, or by a winter storm, fly in for shelter with the foliage of a grove, the flittering shades of the unsubstantial phantom shapes of those for whom there is not any light at all, women and men, famous great-hearted heroes, the life in their hero bodies now defunct, unmarried boys and girls, sons whom their fathers had to watch being placed on the funeral pyre, and all around them hideous tangling reeds. A black ooze of Cocytus, swampy waters, 9 times Styx wound his fettering chain around them, and the house of death was spellbound by his music, all the way down to the bottom of Tartarus. Spellbound the snakes in his hair of Furies too, and Cerberus, the hell dogs, all 3 mouths were open-mouthed and silent, forgetting to bark. The wind was still, and Ixion's wheel stopped turning. And now, as he was carefully going back the way he came, and step by step avoiding all possible wrong steps, and step by step, Eurydice, whom he was bringing back, unseen behind his back, was following, for this is what Proserpina had commanded. They were coming very near the upper air, and a sudden madness seized him. Madness of love, a madness to be forgiven if hell but knew how to forgive. He stopped in his tracks, and then, just as they thought, just as they were about to emerge out into the light, suddenly seized by love, bewildered into heedlessness, alas, his purpose overcome, he turned and looked back at Eurydice, and then, and there, his labor was spilled and flowed away like water. The implacable tyrant broke the pact. 3 times the pools of Avernus heard the sound of thunder. "What was it?" she cried. "What madness, Orpheus, was it that has destroyed us, you and me? Oh, look! The cruel fates already call me back, and sleep covering over my swimming eyes. Farewell. I'm being carried off into the vast surrounding dark, and reaching out my strengthless hands to you forevermore, alas, not yours." And thus, saying this, like smoke disintegrating into the air, she was dispersed away and vanished from his eyes. I never saw him again. And he was left, clutching at shadows, with so much still to say. And the boatman never again would take him across the barrier of the marshy waters of hell. What could he do? His wife twice taken from him. How could he bear it? How could his tears move hell? The Stygian boat had carried her away. And it is said that he, day after day, for 7 months beside the river Strymon, sat underneath a towering cliff and wept, and sang, and told in song his story. Entranced the wild beasts listened, entranced the oak trees moved closer to hear the song, which was like that of a nightingale in the shade of a poplar tree, in mourning for her children who were taken, as yet unfledged, by a herdsman hard of heart who had happened upon the nest. She weeps all night, and over repeats her lamentation, and fills the listening air with her sad complaint. No thought of marriage or any other love could turn his heart away from his bereavement. Alone, he roamed the Hyperborean north and wandered along the snowy banks of the dawn, or through the barren frozen fields on the sides of Riphean mountains. In grief for the lost wife and Hades' empty promise, until the enraged Ciconian Bacchantes, in a nocturnal ritual orgy, tore his body to pieces and scattered the pieces everywhere, far and wide, and as his head, cut off from his beautiful neck, was tumbling down the rushing course of Hebrus, his voice and tongue, with his last breath, cried out, "Eurydice! Oh, poor Eurydice!" And the banks of the downward river Hebrus echoed, "Oh, pure Eurydice! Poor Eurydice!" Thus, Proteus, and suddenly he dived into the sea. The foaming water swirled and eddied where he dived and disappeared. The young man was amazed, but the nymph serene spoke to him with authority and said, "My son, it is permitted now for you to put aside the cares that have disturbed you. The cause of the sicknesses has been explained by this. The nymphs with whom Eurydice used to dance in the deep woodland groves have punished you by bringing down disaster on your houses, on your bees. You must offer the gifts to the nymphs, asking for pardon. The gentle nymphs will respond to your supplication. Their anger will abate. They will forgive you, but I must tell you how to go about it. The matter and order of your rites. Choose 4 outstanding bulls, surpassing all for beauty and conformation. from among your herds that graze the slopes of Mount Lisanus, and choose 4 heifers too, as yet unyoked. Erect 4 altars before the goddesses' shrines, drain from the victims' throats their sacral blood, but leave their bodies there in a leafy grove. After 9 dawns of Aurora's rising light, then you must make funeral offerings of black Lithaean poppies to Orpheus, slay a black ewe, and then return to the grove. He followed at once the commandments of his mother. He went to the sacred place and raised 4 altars. He brought 4 bulls, whose beauty surpassed the beauty of all the others in the grazing herds, 4 heifers too, as yet too young for the yoke. After 9 dawns of Aurora's rising light, he offered to Orpheus black Lithaean poppies, and then he returned to the leafy grove. But there was a sudden marvelous event, a prodigy, miraculous to tell. Everywhere in the bellies of the victims, bees buzzing in from the fermenting viscera, and bursting forth from the raptured sides in swarms that drift along the enormous clouds in the sky, and come together high in the top of a tree, and hang in clusters from the swaying branches. This song I sang, having sung about the care of fields and trees and animals, while Caesar, by the deep Euphrates River, thundered and war, and gave a conqueror's laws to grateful nations, and gloriously sought Olympian heights, and I, the poet Virgil, nurtured by sweet Parthenope, was flourishing in the pleasures of idle studies. I, who bold in youth played games with shepherd songs, and Tyrtus sang of how you lay in ease in the beech tree shade. And that is the end of the Virgils, the Georgics of Virgil. That was quite the read. I enjoyed it. I was expecting it to go to like 2 hours, but an hour and a half will suffice. I assume. I guess. But tomorrow I will be reading a different book. I have it all ready and prepared. But yeah, I am your host Buddha, and I appreciate all those who joined. My robotic moderators, my real moderator Ryan, thank you for joining as well. And with that, I will go off into the night, leaving you with some 80s dark fantasy lo-fi. So, enjoy your night.